Darkness swallows the highway, broken only by two beams of headlights cutting through the night. The vehicle moves steadily from Santo Domingo toward Casablanca Beach, deep in Ecuador's Esmeraldas province. Three young women sit inside: Denise Reyna, Juliana Matias, and Nayeli Tapia. What should have been a carefree getaway to the coast has, somewhere along this stretch of road, curdled into something else entirely. As the night thickens, silence takes over the vehicle. At 11:06 p.m. Missed. Denise types out a message to a friend back home. Something feels wrong. She sends it and watches the screen, waiting. The status freezes on delivered and never changes. That friend would later admit she had no idea, in that moment, just how urgent those words truly were. Almost simultaneously, Nayeli activates location sharing on her phone and transmits her coordinates directly to her sister. Watching the map remotely, her sister sees the marker crawling along the highway, then suddenly cutting off the main route onto an unmarked rural road. Minutes after that turn, the signal vanishes completely. Inside the car, tension presses down on all three women. Juliana attempts to phone friends for help, but the calls refuse to connect, the network dropping entirely. No signal bars remain on any of their screens, and outside the windows, no distant town lights break the darkness. The final trace of activity on their devices registers at approximately 11:15 p.m. After that timestamp, nothing. No texts, no calls, no further location pings. The vehicle simply disappears from the digital map, and with it, every thread of contact severs completely. That night marks the opening chapter of what would become one of the most horrifying criminal cases in Ecuador's modern history. Before we uncover the details of this investigation, I need a small favor. If you enjoy these deep dive cases, supporting the channel with a like, subscribe, and comment goes a long way. Share your theories with me in the comments as we go. I'm always in the comments section reading your takes. Before tragedy struck in Esmeraldas, these three friends from Santo Domingo were living lives defined by ambition and close-knit loyalty. Their friendship spanned years, built on shared dreams and an unshakable belief that their futures held something bright. Juliana Matias, 21, had just graduated from the Zyla Institute with a degree in transportation engineering, finishing as class valedictorian and earning genuine admiration from her professors. Known for her discipline and work ethic, Juliana also pursued a parallel passion for music, performing under the stage name Syria, taking vocal lessons, playing local venues, and posting original songs online, determined to build a singing career entirely on her own terms, without relying on industry producers. Denise Reyna, 19, had spent her childhood rescuing stray animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, with plans to eventually open a clinic dedicated to helping creatures who couldn't advocate for themselves. She was actively preparing to relocate to the United States to finish her education and start fresh, closer to a close friend already living there. Those who knew her described her as steady, level-headed, and someone people could always count on. Nayeli Tapia, 22, was raising a 4-year-old daughter alone. After struggling to find stable employment in Quito, she had pivoted into modeling, booking shoots, and weighing a potential move to Spain, all driven by one central goal: securing a safe, stable future for her child. Nayeli combined relentless determination with genuine warmth, qualities that had carried her through repeated hardship. Despite geographic distance and demanding schedules, the three women stayed connected almost daily, trading updates, celebrating milestones, and planning what came next. Their shared conviction that persistence and mutual support would eventually pay off kept them close right up until their final trip together. In early April 2023, back in Santo Domingo, Denise reconnected with Luis Fernando Vaca, an acquaintance she'd known for several years. During their meeting, Vaca floated the idea of a short coastal getaway, specifically to Esmeraldas province, with lodging arranged in the tourist district of Casablanca. He framed it as a simple, low-key road trip lasting just a few days and encouraged Denise to bring her friends along. Denise didn't commit on the spot. She told him she needed to run it by Juliana and Nayeli first, sort out dates, figure out lodging, and confirm who else would be joining. She made clear she wasn't agreeing to anything without her friends weighing in. Vaca reassured her it would be straightforward: daytime driving, beach relaxation, and a return trip within the agreed window. Nothing more complicated than that. Afterward, Denise reached out to Juliana and Nayeli, pitching the idea of a brief Casablanca vacation, hotel accommodations, and a relaxed itinerary. She mentioned that a few of Vaca's acquaintances might also tag along, and stressed that this was nothing beyond a casual beach trip, no rigid schedule, nothing extravagant. Juliana confirmed she could get away for a few days. Nayeli began arranging childcare so she could join as well. Denise then informed her own family, describing a proposed few days at the beach with a quick turnaround, though she noted nothing was finalized yet, since she still needed full agreement from her friends and a few logistical details ironed out. She referenced Casablanca as the destination, a well-known resort area in Esmeraldas typically reached from Santo Domingo by car. The three friends spent the following days finalizing plans, discussing what to pack, coordinating meeting points, and mapping out the trip's flow. Nothing about the conversations raised concern. The route was familiar territory, and the plan read like any standard weekend escape. Eventually, all three confirmed their participation. Denise informed Vaca she wouldn't be traveling solo, that Juliana and Nayeli would be joining, and that the group was ready to depart soon. At that stage, every person involved shared an identical understanding of what this trip was supposed to be. Nothing in their messages, nothing in their conversations hinted at anything unusual. No odd requests, no last-minute changes to the route. The date was locked in for the first week of April, and departure was confirmed. On the morning of April 4th, Denise left her home in Santo Domingo. Later that same day, Nayeli arrived from Quito to spend time with her friends before the trip. After running errands throughout the day, the group regrouped at Denise's house, finalizing their plan to depart for the coast that evening. As night fell, a black Chevrolet sedan pulled up outside. Behind the wheel sat Luis Fernando Vaca. Denise and Nayeli climbed into the car, and the group then swung by to collect Juliana Matias, completing the trio. At roughly the same time, a second vehicle was making its way in the identical direction, carrying Andres Zambrano and Omar Ardanos. Their departure aligned suspiciously well with the girls' timeline, and at multiple points along the highway, witnesses would later confirm the two vehicles traveled in close proximity, maintaining visual contact across long stretches of road. The route connecting Santo Domingo to Casablanca was well established and simple, a federal highway leading out of the city that eventually merged into a coastal road, with the total drive typically taking around 4 hours barring major stops. Fuel levels were adequate, phones were charged, and cellular service remained available for most of the journey. Vaca stayed behind the wheel of the rented Chevrolet the entire time, with no reported issues involving the vehicle or its paperwork at departure. By the morning of April 5th, the families of all three women had stopped receiving any response whatsoever. Messages sat unread on messaging apps. Phone calls rang out unanswered. Instead of the expected quick check-in confirming safe arrival at Casablanca, the group chats sat completely dormant. By midday, each family independently launched their own search for answers, contacting mutual friends the girls had been in touch with the previous night, trying to reconstruct their exact departure time and whether any stops had been mentioned. No one had heard a word since late the night before. Call logs showed nothing but a string of failed connection attempts. Nayeli's sister pulled up the location sharing app and confirmed the last signal update had come in late on April 4th. Then, abruptly ceased. No further movement, no additional pings. That absence became the first unmistakable red flag that something had gone seriously wrong. The families exchanged screenshots of the last known locations and began methodically documenting every available detail. By the evening of April 5th, their individual efforts merged into a coordinated response. Together, they built a timeline of the girls' final known communications, mapped their expected travel route, and compiled detailed physical descriptions, clothing, phone models, everything that might assist a search. They collectively decided to formally report the disappearance to police, while simultaneously mobilizing public attention through social media. On the morning of April 6th, attorney Paulina Rueda, Juliana's aunt, filed an official missing persons report with national police. The report detailed the women's names, ages, point of departure from Santo Domingo, the anticipated coastal route, the exact time of last contact, and emergency contact information for all three families. The case was immediately classified as urgent. Search operations began at once. Police circulated alerts to stations positioned along the route, checked hospitals and emergency medical centers, and notified highway checkpoint units stationed on roads leading toward Esmeraldas. Families were instructed to report any new developments immediately and preserve all message records intact. Simultaneously, a public search effort took shape. Relatives and friends flooded social media with photos of Denise, Juliana, and Nayeli, alongside their last known location and contact numbers, and these posts rapidly spread across community pages in Santo Domingo and groups centered on the Esmeraldas coastal region. Volunteers stepped forward to help monitor incoming tips and organize the flood of information. By midday on April 6th, families had assembled the critical framework, the girl's last confirmed activity, the precise moment Nayeli's location tracking ceased, and the repeated pattern of failed contact attempts. Still, there was no breakthrough. All gathered information was handed directly to the lead investigator, with both families and police agreeing to maintain continuous information exchange. By evening on April 6th, uncertainty still hung over the case. No highway incident reports, no hospital records tied to the missing women. Communication lines remained open, and the collective search continued into the following day, with the shared understanding that any new lead could break the case wide open. On the afternoon of April 7th, fishermen working near the Esmeraldas River in the Quininde area noticed a dog obsessively digging at the edge of a brush-covered clearing. Investigating further, they discovered a partially buried body. Police arrived immediately, secured the perimeter, and began a careful excavation. A short distance from that first discovery, 2 additional bodies emerged from the ground. All 3 victims were female, dressed in light clothing consistent with beachwear. Each victim had her hands bound and her mouth sealed with tape. Preliminary external examination revealed extensive injuries, suggesting prolonged suffering, bruising, abrasions, and rope burn marks across the skin. Each woman had sustained deep lacerations to the neck, wounds consistent with a machete or another heavy-bladed instrument. The soft facial tissue on the victims showed severe trauma as well. The remains were transported to the morgue for forensic examination and formal identification, and the families were officially notified of the tragedy. Identification proceeded using a combination of physical characteristics, body structure, clothing items, tattoos, and other distinguishing marks. The severity of the injuries complicated the process considerably, particularly in one case where facial disfigurement forced examiners to rely entirely on physical features below the head. Forensic analysis confirmed all 3 victims had suffered a combination of sharp force and stab wounds, injuries to the head and limbs, and clear indicators of prolonged physical restraint. The official cause of death for each victim was determined to be deep neck wounds, resulting in catastrophic blood loss. Denise Reyna specifically showed a deep laceration across her palm, alongside a severe blow to her forearm, both classified as defensive wounds sustained while fighting back. Juliana Matias presented multiple contusions across her face and chest, including trauma consistent with a blunt object. Nayeli Tapia showed mixed injuries spanning her torso and limbs, along with clear signs of intense compression around her wrists. Based on this combination of physical evidence and personal identifiers, the victims were officially confirmed as Denise Reyna, Juliana Matias, and Nayeli Tapia. Expert forensic reports catalog detailed injury descriptions, estimated time of death, and a full inventory of biological samples collected for comparative testing, alongside documentation of the clothing, restraints, and microscopic trace evidence recovered from skin and fabric. Once initial forensic procedures concluded, all materials were transferred to the lead investigator under standard legal protocol, and families were briefed on both the identification results and the investigation's next steps. At this stage, the case had a solid foundation: a confirmed recovery location, verified victim identities, and objective forensic evidence pointing unmistakably to a brutal, coordinated crime. A pivotal break in the investigation emerged from location data Nayeli had shared with her sister on the night she vanished. Investigators seized her sister's phone and pulled the geolocation log, which showed continuous movement late into the evening of April 4th, before the signal abruptly terminated. That final recorded coordinate matched precisely with the area near the Esmeraldas River, where the bodies surfaced on April 7th. Cross-referencing timestamps against the last known communication attempts, authorities determined that location updates ceased almost immediately after the vehicle diverted off the main highway toward a more remote route. Investigators then pivoted to surveillance footage captured along roadways connecting Santo Domingo to rural villages bordering the tourist zone. Security cameras mounted on private residences and small businesses had captured a two-vehicle convoy traveling in close formation. A black Chevrolet sedan trailed closely by a second car. Multiple frames clearly identified the Chevrolet, its make, color, and body style matching records held by a local rental agency. A formal request to that agency confirmed the vehicle had been rented days before the trip under the name Holger Zambrano, with pickup and return dates matching the suspected timeline precisely. Further investigation confirmed that on April 4th, the vehicle was actually being driven by Luis Fernando Vaca, corroborated both through witness testimony and direct visual comparison between the driver captured on surveillance footage and Vaca's known appearance. Cross-referencing the vehicle's tracked path against the expected route to Casablanca revealed something critical. Surveillance footage showed the convoy turning off the main highway at an intersection, heading into increasingly remote terrain, before eventually merging onto an unpaved dirt road. That turn coincided almost exactly with the moment Nayeli's location tracking went dark, a key indicator that the group had never been heading toward the coastal resort at all, but instead toward an isolated area that would later connect directly to the river where the bodies were recovered. Days after the bodies were discovered, the black Chevrolet sedan was located back in Santo Domingo, bearing damage consistent with a recent collision. Forensic testing using luminol and rapid blood detection reagents revealed biological fluid traces in both the passenger compartment and the trunk. Investigators additionally recovered a fingernail fragment wedged between a plastic panel and the dashboard seal, a fragment preliminarily linked, based on physical characteristics, to Denise Reyna. Every biological sample, swabs, fabric fibers, and the nail fragment was properly collected and logged. Taken together, this evidence pointed investigators toward several critical conclusions: the notable absence of blood at the riverbank itself, the concentration of biological evidence inside the vehicle, and the precise alignment between the final location signal and the point where the convoy left the main road. Combined, this evidence strongly suggested the violence hadn't occurred at the burial site at all, but rather during transit or at a stop along the way, most likely inside the rented Chevrolet sedan itself. This theory became the central working framework guiding the remainder of the investigation. Authorities quickly identified 4 individuals connected to the disappearance and murder of Denise Reyna, Juliana Matias, and Nayeli Tapia: Luis Fernando Vaca, Holger Zambrano, Andres Zambrano, and Omar Ardanos. All 4 had traveled along the same route as the victims and were confirmed to be closely linked to one another. Vaca emerged as the central figure. A friend of Denise's who had proposed the trip, arranged the logistics, and personally drove the vehicle carrying the 3 women. Investigators confirmed his connections to the other suspects through recovered messages and the coordinated, synchronized movement of both vehicles throughout the journey. Holger Zambrano had rented the black Chevrolet, a critical detail since without his involvement, the trip in that specific vehicle would never have been possible. He maintained ongoing communication with Vaca and helped coordinate movement between the 2 cars, suggesting his role extended well beyond a simple rental transaction into active participation in the broader plan. Andres Zambrano, Holger's brother, traveled separately from Vaca, but alongside Omar Ardanos. Surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts confirmed their vehicle followed the same route, maintaining close trailing distance behind the car carrying the girls, a clear signal of coordinated, deliberate action rather than coincidence. Ardanos, an associate connected to both Zambrano and Vaca, occupied that second trailing vehicle, moving in lockstep with the girls' car during the critical window. What tied all 4 men to the victims came down to direct involvement in planning the trip itself. Vaca maintained personal contact with Denise, extended the invitation, proposed the route, and supplied transportation. The Zambrano brothers and Ardanos, as his close associates, helped orchestrate the surrounding logistics. Collectively, this gave all 4 both direct access to the victims and control over how the entire trip unfolded. From there, investigators developed 2 competing theories regarding motive and the crime's execution. The first theory centers on a sudden, violent outburst triggered by rejection. Attorney Paulina Rueda, Juliana's aunt, suggested the attack may have erupted from a confrontation following the women's refusal of unwanted sexual advances, framing the motive around coercion and aggression rather than any romantic dynamic. This theory also accounts for the sudden escalation and extreme brutality documented in the injuries. The second theory frames the crime as fully premeditated. The victims' families pointed to multiple indicators of advanced planning: the presence of a coordinating second vehicle functioning as surveillance, the deliberate diversion away from the established tourist route, active efforts to conceal evidence afterward, and most tellingly, the sheer size of the burial site itself. Families argued it would have been nearly impossible to dig a pit that large spontaneously under cover of darkness, implying the burial location had been prepared well in advance. This theory also aligned neatly with the deliberately staged appearance of the damaged, abandoned rental car later recovered in the city. A separate rumor, alleging the use of acid to destroy evidence, was ultimately ruled out by forensic testing, which found no corresponding chemical residue. At this stage of the investigation, authorities didn't officially favor either theory, since both remained consistent with the established facts: the shared travel route, the suspects' interconnected relationships, their collective control over transportation, and precise timing. What mattered most was that all four men possessed both opportunity and means to carry out the crime, whether acting individually or through coordinated, assigned roles. On May 29th, Ecuador's Attorney General's office and national police arrested brothers Holger and Andrés Zambrano near the border with Peru. Border agents reported the pair had been actively attempting to flee the country. Arrest warrants had been issued based on surveillance footage, vehicle rental documentation, and phone call records. Both suspects were transported to a nearby station for questioning before being formally transferred into custody. Officials confirmed the attempted border crossing occurred at the height of the nationwide manhunt for those connected to the murders. Weeks later, a disturbing development surfaced. Authorities recovered the remains of Luis Fernando Vaca in Chimborazo province. Forensic analysis revealed the body had been dismembered, with cause of death attributed to violent trauma. Experts determined Vaca had died back in April, shortly after the three women vanished, meaning the man who had driven the vehicle that night, and who represented a potentially critical witness, had been killed before police ever began making arrests. According to attorney Paulina Rueda, Vaca's own parents had received direct threats and were forced to flee the country entirely. The family believed he had intended to testify about the events of April 4th, and that his murder represented a calculated effort to silence him permanently before the truth could surface. The search for Omar Ardanos dragged on considerably longer. He remained in hiding, constantly relocating and deliberately avoiding any location he'd previously frequented. He was finally apprehended in November 2023. During questioning, investigators uncovered his ties to the criminal organization known as Los Choneros, along with prior convictions for illegal firearm possession. His documented connection to organized crime reinforced the growing theory that this had been a coordinated operation involving multiple actors with deliberate efforts to erase evidence. Once the core suspect group had been identified and key evidence firmly established, prosecutors revised the case's legal classification, downgrading it from femicide to standard homicide. The official reasoning centered on the absence of any romantic or familial relationship between the victims and the accused, which prosecutors argued disqualified the case from meeting the legal definition of femicide. This reclassification carried significant weight, forcing a complete restructuring of the charges and altering the potential sentencing range entirely. The families of Denise, Juliana, and Nayeli viewed this reclassification as a deliberate attempt to minimize the true severity of the crime. They issued public statements insisting the sheer brutality of the violence pointed unmistakably to a gender-based motive, backed by forensic findings documenting clear evidence of torture, restraint, and severe lacerations, alongside the undeniable fact that the suspects had maintained total control over the victims' movements throughout the ordeal. Attorney Paulina Rueda emphasized that the absence of romantic ties doesn't automatically rule out gender-based violence, particularly when a crime is committed specifically because of the victim's gender. She maintained that coercion, rejection, and the resulting aggression squarely fit within the legal framework defining gender-motivated killing, arguing that downgrading the charge fundamentally weakened legal protections for women and undermined broader efforts to combat systemic violence. the prosecution's decision triggered significant public backlash. Women's advocacy organizations, human rights defenders, and local community groups organized protests and launched online campaigns demanding the original femicide charge be reinstated, insisting on full evidentiary transparency and formal acknowledgement of the gender-based motive. Despite mounting public pressure and additional reports submitted by both sides, the official charge remained homicide, ultimately shaping the entire structure of the trial and sentencing framework. The families vowed to continue fighting for recognition of the crime's gender-based nature and broader reform in how such cases get classified going forward. On the 9th of April, 2024, in Esmeraldas province, the first formal court hearing in the murder case commenced. The defendants standing trial were Andres Zambrano and Omar Ardanos, while Holger Zambrano's role as the vehicle's renter was addressed in a separate proceeding. The court session opened with formal charges read aloud, alongside a comprehensive summary of admitted evidence. Prosecutors presented detailed forensic and autopsy reports, confirming the precise nature of the injuries and manner of death, supplemented by biological and trace evidence recovered from the rented Chevrolet alongside surveillance camera footage. Rental agency employees testified, and witnesses identified one of the defendants in the company of one victim shortly before the group's departure. The defense strategy centered entirely on shifting full culpability onto the deceased Luis Fernando Vaca, with attorneys arguing he had controlled the route and could have acted entirely alone in committing the violence. They contended the presented evidence failed to directly implicate their clients. Defense motions sought to exclude certain video footage and challenge the admissibility of biological samples on grounds of potential contamination, but the court rejected these motions, citing properly documented handling and preservation procedures throughout. Regarding Holger Zambrano specifically, the court found no evidence placing him at the crime scene or establishing direct involvement in the violence itself, concluding his role was strictly limited to renting the vehicle, resulting in his acquittal on those charges. On the 17th of May, 2024, the court found Andres Zambrano and Omar Ardanos guilty of murder, sentencing each to 34 years and 8 months in prison. The verdict rested on a combination of forensic reporting, travel route data, rental agency testimony, and eyewitness accounts, evidence the court deemed sufficient to secure conviction. Despite the sentencing, the victims' families felt no genuine sense of resolution is less than #0. 2 is greater than legally, the case had concluded, but emotionally and morally, critical questions remained unanswered. What precisely triggered the crime? Were additional individuals involved? And how much had been deliberately concealed? Attorney Paulina Rueda, representing the families and advocating specifically on behalf of Juliana Matias, continued pursuing further justice, gathering additional evidence she believed could expand the list of implicated suspects, while publicly criticizing investigative shortcomings and pushing for the case's reclassification as a gender-motivated crime. In June 2024, Paulina reported suspicious surveillance activity near her home. A month later, she began receiving direct threats through phone calls and text messages. She reported these threats to police, but no protective measures were implemented. Then, in August, tragedy struck directly. Her son was killed. Although authorities classified the death as a domestic incident, the family remained convinced it was directly connected to Paulina's ongoing work on the triple murder case. Weeks later, Paulina herself vanished entirely, suddenly ceasing all communication and going completely unreachable. Given her prominent role as a lawyer, human rights advocate, and the family's legal representative, combined with the documented pattern of prior threats, police launched an extensive search operation. 2 days later, Paulina was located in the Tasagua area of Manabí province and transported to a medical facility in stable condition, later returning home to Santo Domingo. The precise circumstances behind her abduction were never publicly disclosed. Multiple theories circulated, though none received official confirmation. What remains certain is that she survived, but her disappearance was undeniably real, deeply serious, and almost certainly connected to her continued work on this triple murder case. 2 years after the bodies were first discovered, on the 7th of April, 2025, a private memorial ceremony was held near the Esmeraldas River. Etched into a stone placed by volunteers were the names Denise Reyna, Juliana Matias, and Nayeli Tapia. Every year since, women, activists, and journalists return to that exact location, lighting candles and tying white ribbons, not merely to honor the memory of 3 young lives cut brutally short, but to remind the world that the pursuit of truth must continue until every remaining question finds its answer.